But the biggest game on the PlayStation 2 came out in October this year, in 2001, and this was when Scottish-based developer DMA Design released Grand Theft Auto 3 under a new publishing house that would soon rock the gaming world called Rockstar Games, who would go on to become the most profitable and recognised publishing house in the Western world. So before we look at the game itself that made them big, let's first take a little history lesson on how this important publishing house came about. Back in the early 90s, two brothers from London, Dan and Sam Houser, wanted to get in music production, and so they started work for BMG music label, but they found the company full of suits and the job dull. So in 1994, when BMG set up a new gaming division, the Houser brothers leapt at the chance of this new venture, as they could see there was a real market for more edgier, more adult-based games. The first titles that they would release under this BMG interactive label was Firo and Claude in 1996 and Mass Destruction in 1997. These were okay games, but little to set the world alight. But in 1997 the brothers would meet Edinburgh-based developer DMA Design, who had made a name for themselves on the Amiga, producing such hits as Menace, Blood Money, Walker and Hired Guns, before setting the world alight with their game Lemmings, released back in 1990. Since then they had continued with a string of sequels to the Lemmings game, but by 1994 things were becoming a little bit stale in the Lemmings department, and so they wanted to do something different and more adult themed. Their new proposed title was called Race and Chase, which would be an open-ended city where you could do anything, and they would include a mafia-fueled plot, giving a storyline to the much-wanted destruction in the proposed game. Psygnosis, who had normally produced DMA games, had turned down the proposal, feeling that the game's themes were far too adult for them, and it would cause a world of pain for any publisher attempting to release the title. But the Houser brothers of BMG Interactive, meanwhile, loved the idea, finally feeling they had found that game that they were looking for, and so gleefully snapped up the rights to produce the game. The game was eventually called Grand Theft Auto, and although taking almost 3 years to write, it would be a huge commercial success, with gamers lapping up this new style of gameplay. But with such long development time to produce the game, DMA were now financially struggling, and so was bought out by Gremlin Interactive in 1997. Gremlin Interactive, meanwhile, were also struggling, so they in turn were bought out in 1999 by Infograms, who would then respectively sell on DMA Design to BMG Interactive. Despite the success of the Grand Theft Auto game, it wasn't commercially a big enough hit to turn around the financial woes of the floundering BMG Interactive company, and so they in turn sold on to Take-Two Interactive, another new publisher, this time in America, who also wanted to do adult-based games and saw with the Grand Theft Auto game they could also achieve that. So in 1999 Dan and Sam Houser moved from London to New York, the Big Apple, and called their new publishing house under Take-Two Rockstar. They would work with DMA Design to do a sequel to the Grand Theft Auto games, which was more of the same, but was again popular and sold well. They also brought other development talent under their publishing house at this time, such as Bungie, who produced the OK stylized action game only for them. Rockstar realised, however, that to truly make their mark, they needed to push the boat out in the finance department and do a game with a huge budget, and so they decided to work on a new Grand Theft Auto game with DMA Design, and they would finally decide to set the game out in glorious full 3D. So, on to the game itself, Grand Theft Auto 3. This took all that was great about the open-ended world of the first two games to be fully in 3D, set in a fictional city from the first game called Liberty City, which was basically New York in all but name. It finally offered gamers a fully realised, detailed city for them to explore, while still enjoying all the humour and destruction of what the first games in the series had become known for. The game had gorgeous graphics, and the do whatever you want game mechanics in the game won many over to this new title, with the game selling 14.5 million units since its release and becoming the #1 hit in both America and Europe, despite the $49.95 asking price. The game was also critically acclaimed, with it being one of the few to get the fabled 10 out of 10 from Edge magazine, and Electronic Games Monthly gave the game 9.33 out of 10. Such a global hit would of course result in DMA, now called Rockstar North, doing some sequels, but it's testament to the Scottish team that they continually pushed themselves on each subsequent Grand Theft Auto release. The first sequel they did was Grand Theft Auto Vice City, which was released in October 2002, and this time you set back in 1986 in Vice City, which is basically Miami in all but name. This was one of my favourite in the series, as by setting it in the 80s and a sun-drenched location, it made me love the game simply for driving around the cityscape, enjoying the Latino music on the radio stations. Incidentally, the game also had a cameo of Phil Collins in the game, which was quite good fun, and the game was met again with huge positive critical and commercial success, selling an unprecedented 15 million units since release. For the next title in the Fantastic series, they would surpass themselves again with Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, based this time on a California state, with it offering 3 cities in the game for you to explore, having Los Santos, which was based on Los Angeles, San Fierro, based on San Francisco, and Los Venturas, based on Las Vegas. Set in 1992, the game was amazing, offering a massive open-ended world for you to explore. It also had many innovations to the series, such as finally seamless load times and the ability to fully customize what you wear. The music as well deserves note, which had been massively increased for this game, with a whopping 11 radio stations for you to enjoy. For many, this was their favourite game in the series, and it certainly was the most popular, with the game being another critical and commercial hit, selling 21.5 million units sold since its release. Incidentally, all of the Grand Theft Auto 3D games used the powerful game engine Renderware, which was made by Guildford, England developer called Criterion Games. They had previously made a name for themselves back in 1999 with Trickstyle on the Dreamcast, but it was in November the 1st, 2001 that they first truly hit the big time with their game called Burnout. This game was a fantastic arcade racer. What made the game so special was the glorious slow motion replays of your crashes, showing it in all its full destructive glory. The game was met with positive reviews, although many critics cited the game's hardness levels was set far too high, making the game unnecessarily frustrating. A sequel called Burnout 2 Point of Impact was released the following year in September the 30th. This upped the number of tracks of the original and improved on the game's difficulty levels. In September 2004, the world saw Burnout 3 Takedown, with Criterion Games now fully in swing and now owned by publisher Electronic Arts. So, for their third release, they would do the most ambitious of the series, offering even more racetracks and with gameplay honed to perfection. It goes down as one of the best arcade races of all time. They would continue on the PS2 with Burnout Revenge in 2005 and Burnout Dominator in 2007.